Thank you very much, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. As Ulrich mentioned, the social network analysis is the most relevant technique that we've used here. It's a heuristical technique that puts the focus on the relations and not in the attributes and the quality of the data. It allows us to analyze the way of different nodes are connected and detect structures within these relations. In this case, for the network, the nodes are the economies that are linked through the services that are provided by the accreditation bodies and the assessment conformity assessment bodies. As Ulrich mentioned, this base is composed by 184 countries. It's 146 economies that are participating in this network, exporting or importing these services and generating 339 international links. The graph you can see allows us to identify three aspects. The first one is that it's a very centralized network where only 32 economies have exported in the period that we have taken into consideration. And the first 10 represent 91% of all accreditations and 77% of the existing relationships. Take into account that in the graph, the size of the nodes are proportional to the volume of the services they have exported. It's for that reason that we can see a group of central economies, reduced group, and most of them are peripheral economies. The counterpart of this centralization on the side of the exporters is that from the point of view of the importing of these services, centralization is there's less centralization and it's more distributed. In China represents 30% of accreditations and 4% of the relationships that exist. In third place, we have applied an algorithm that's available in one of the softwares that were mentioned that allows us to identify blocks or regions within the network. This heuristical method, it's an iterative process that is repeated until we get an optimum results that would be, in this case, the situation where we maximize the relationships within each block and we would minimize the relationships with the other partitions. So this allows us to identify a first block in purple, which is the biggest block. It involves 93 economies, and it's clearly influenced by the United States and other European economies. You can see other smaller blocks with dense relationships in their interior, in particular the South Africa, the economies from the south of Africa and Botswana, and others are linked to France particularly, and another block that goes from Mongolia to the Mediterranean and led by Greece and Kazakhstan, and two groups in the Caribbean and Central America led by Jamaica and Costa Rica. So here we have a first pattern of relationships that we can interpret it in another manner too. This slide and the following one complements what I just mentioned. When you see the graph from the exports point of view, the United States represents 64% of accreditations, cross-frontier accreditations, 29% of the relationships, and then we have Germany, Australia, or Great Britain, and also other countries that we have identified as references, like France or Botswana or South Africa. In relation to imports, they're more distributed, and the 16 first importing economies represent 46% of the accreditations and 25% of the relationships. Here we can highlight China, India, Canada, Japan, and Mexico. We can observe a different relation between the amount of imported services and the amount of the international network. There are cases such as China, where we have 2 economies, and Mexico and Canada only depend on 2 or 3 suppliers. In this map, we have put the same data, but in this case, we were exploring if we had some relationship pattern in the network. with countries that are close, or when countries belong to the same accreditation body. So this implies a different way of being close, which is historical, linguistical, or cultural. In the hypothesis, the one that showed more value is the second one. So here we can make an analysis where we consider 5 of the cooperation bodies, understanding that the members of the South African region are within that continental association, and we also privileged countries where that were geographically close. And in the graph, we can see some of these relationships and the importance of these links. And now we are going to see this table, which is crossed densities. We can see the proportion of possible relationships within each regional association and with other associations, including a category of economies that haven't signed into the agreement. So we can see here exports, and in most cases, the relations within each association are more than what they have between associations. A special case is the European region, because evidently Europe provides more services to other regions than within its borders, something that we had already seen in previous graphs. In the case of the United States, its influence elevates the relationships with the American region. As you can see in this table, this affects imports that we can see here vertically, and we can see that several regions have more services from the American region than from their own region. This happens in Asia, Pacific, Europe, or the Arabic region. So this could indicate that there's a preference to export services within their signatory bodies, but these aren't enough to cover their demand because of qualitative, quantitative reasons, and that's why they are covered by the United States. Finally, after reviewing the structural patterns with the available information, we made a categorization in relation to the balance of imports and exports of each country. And we can see that there's a group of economies that are only imports that we divided in 2 groups. One was the group that hadn't provided any service in this period, and others that had done it at a local level. Here we have a group of economies that don't have their own accreditation body. On the other side, we have 2 economies, Portugal and Botswana, and in this period, they only exported services. They didn't import any service. In the other cases, we have economies that import and export at the same time. And the 15 countries I mentioned that are big have more exports than imports. And others for which there's other countries that are the other way around. They have more imports than exports. We have China, Mexico, and Canada.
To wrap up our findings, we concluded with 5 statements. First, that accreditation takes place predominantly in the national framework. This is what we have not researched in this study, but it's important to highlight. The second part regarding cross-border accreditation is that accreditation communities assume that competition between accreditation bodies would lead to inefficient duplication and negative effects on the transparency in the global accreditation system. Therefore, we have this principle, one accreditation body by country, especially in Europe. That cross-border accreditation is 2.7% of all accreditation worldwide. When we are looking to this, it's predominantly, as Andrés already stated, within the same region, and that we have a dominant role of certain accreditation bodies, especially the United States of America and other industrialized countries. And on the other hand, and this will be also part of this discussion here, we have an increasing relevance of binational and regional accreditation services and also corporations. Thank you very much.